in just a moment, while we're doing this sort of set change, we are going to hear some real live examples of how folks around the nation are actually using these messaging tactics, these tools, as well as GOTC strategies for the Get Out the Count. But before I do that, I want to bring a very special guest on the stage. She is part of a dynamic duo in the City Council who has been a champion for census outreach over the last year. Councilmember Carlina Rivera, who is the councilwoman of the 2nd Councilmatic District in Manhattan, is a rock star in the City Council. She is leading the charge on a number of different fronts, but we are very happy that she is on the case for census. And without further ado, Councilmember Rivera.
You saw that set change. You saw those women in action. That's what we're doing, leading. So thank you, everyone, for coming to the New York City Census Summit. I am so proud and very humbled to be in this room. I'll just confirm what was kind of already said. That was a lot of information. But I'm excited to use these tools, and it'll help for your branding, your marketing, for whatever you're doing. And we have to reach every single person, right? We all know what the statistics are, how many children were undercounted, how many places we have to get to make sure that we are really conveying the messaging. And you're going to hear a great panel in a minute. So I typically tell a very quick story. We don't have a lot of time today, but so my name is Carlina Rivera and I'm in the City Council. And how I got here, though, was a very long road. And I was raised by a single mother, and I grew up in Section 8. And she used WIC, which is a supplemental food program, to feed me and my sister. And we relied on things like school lunch. And now here I am, a City Council woman, making sure that we are organizing, thank you, making sure that we are organizing for billions of dollars and political representation, which is so important. So since I became the co-chair of the Census Task Force, I made sure as soon as I got in the City Council that I really wanted to do this. This was something that was really personal for me. I was excited about it. I'm with Council Member Carlos Menchaca, and of course with the amazing leadership of our Speaker, Corey Johnson. And we've been fighting since last February to make sure that everyone in New York is counted in the 2020 census. But it has been a longer road than that. Many of us were thinking about how 2010 went, and some of us still have our tote bags that we carry. I know my mother still does. And so from educating my fellow council colleagues on how they can do outreach in their own districts to joining our allies to successfully oppose that Trump immigration question on the census, our task force has been up to a lot. We really secured millions and millions of dollars in funding, making sure that we release those funds right away, and we're glad that the state has followed suit. But the important role our task force has played is that $40 million in funding for a joint census partnership between the mayor's office, City Council, and CUNY. And I think the CUNY piece is also really important because those are students, all right? Yeah, I see you, table 37. Those are our students that are in these hard to reach communities. And these are also the students who really need this funding. And CUNY is an amazing institution, and I'm excited. So we know the census has been plagued with underfunding. There's been Republican meddling, I'm gonna say it. They limited our dry run to one state, to Rhode Island, and I went to Rhode Island, and they talked of the challenges that they had. This is the smallest state, and they had challenges in their dry run, and we were limited to one. One of their largest challenges was reaching the Portuguese community. In Queens, do you know how many languages we have just in Queens? Over 100, over 150 languages just in Queens. So I am so glad that we have formed a coalition of diverse organizations who understand how important it is to speak those dialects and to reach people with these trusted messengers. So this partnership is already mobilizing a massive campaign with advertising, translation services, and direct outreach from community-based organizations. And I'm looking forward to seeing all of those organizations, many of you are here today, receiving funding from what is a historic investment. And I'm here before this great panel. They're going to talk about outreach and messaging. And for some of you who are just getting to know me, I am extremely competitive. And I know that field and communications, it's everything. That's how you win. And that's what this is, a national competition that I, along with all of you, intend on winning. But once we're out in the field, it's important we're all using the best outreach and messaging strategies, and I have to thank Abney, who's really leading the way on this. And I'm excited to introduce today's first panel, Outreach, Messaging, and Get Out the Count from a National Perspective. And I've had the pleasure of hearing firsthand examples of Get Out the Count strategies being implemented on the national level, and I'm excited you're gonna get to hear from some of those experts today. So I'm gonna very briefly introduce them because I know we have to get to it. So we have Jerry Green, currently the Senior Advisor at the National Urban League for the 2020 Census, spearheading strategy development and census initiatives. Let's clap, let's give it up. This is hard work. Juan Rosa, Northeast Director of Civic Engagement with Naleo Education Fund. Sonam Narukar, currently the Get Out the Count Manager at the National Leadership Conference Education Fund. Thaisa Morimoto, Senior Policy Counsel at the National LGBTQ Task Force, working on census advocacy, criminal and economic justice, and reproductive justice, also part of the Queer the Census team at the task force. And we have Jennifer Jones Austin, who will be moderating the panel, Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies. Maybe you've heard of her. And it's an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization with 170 member organizations. Thank you to all of you for being here, and thank you to this incredible, talented panel for giving us their time and their expertise. To all of you, enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you. Thank you for your partnership and for trusting in us to help lead.
Take a seat, any seat. Choose a seat.
Uh-oh.
Good? All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I need a mic. Let's see. All right. I tell people sometimes I am the daughter, the granddaughter, and the great-granddaughter of Baptist preachers. So I shouldn't need a mic. But sometimes I do. Good morning, everybody. I'm thrilled to see so many of you here this morning. I have been moving around the country, having talks on a variety of issues, and one of them is census. And I can't tell you how many rooms I've entered that have been half empty on such a critical topic as this. So to see so many of you here this morning, ready to engage and roll up your sleeves and do the work in connection with the census is very encouraging. It's very inspiring. It's also encouraging that the room is so diverse and is so representative of the people who need to be engaged and informed about the census. In turn, we have a panel that is representative of the community, for the community, in the community. And what we're going to do for the next 45 minutes or so is have a conversation. You've heard a lot this morning about the importance of the census, about toolkits, key information, why it's significant, why it matters. But what we're going to do with this panel is to really go, kind of a little deeper. We're going to have a conversation, just as we'd be having conversations in the communities about why this is important. And so we're going to jump right in. There'll be some time for Q&A, so as the panel is talking, I want you to think about some of the points that are being made, and if you need them to expound upon it, we'll talk about that during Q&A. And if you have any questions that arise from what they're saying or what they haven't said. Good deal? Let's jump right in. All right, so the first question, or the first issue I want to talk about, when people talk about the census, they talk about funding, they talk about representation. Beginning with you, Jerry, and I want others to speak about this as well if you care to. You've talked about it as a civil rights issue, right? Others have talked about, the Leadership Institute has talked about it, and Resource Institute has talked about it as a democracy issue. Help people to understand what that is.
Turn this on.
Turn it on.
All right.
Everybody's up.
Can you hear me? Very well. Okay, first about the National Urban League. The Urban League has advocated for an accurate count of vulnerable populations, particularly in the African American community, for the last 50 years. We believe that the 2020 census will be a game changer for our populations for any number of reasons. The incredible distrust across the country and the polarization, the racial polarization that we're seeing. And so these are going to have consequences. The connection, however, between an accurate count and civil rights benefits and all of that advocacy and advancement is direct and consequential. There's no dotted line, it's a straight line. And the implications of this were baked into the Constitution in the 1790 census, and I want to correct Ian on this, when people who were of African descent and were enslaved were counted as 3/5 of a person. So that was the beginning of it, as we all know. And that was for political purposes, for the purposes of apportionment and as a concession to southern states, as we all know. So let's fast forward a couple hundred years, if we may, and the connection is just as compelling. Fair, proportionate voting representation in America depends on an accurate count, period. Federal agencies rely on census data to monitor discrimination and implement civil rights enforcement laws that protect voting rights, equal employment, fair housing, education, and more. Again, a direct line to our civil rights. The Electoral College that picked the current occupant of the White House and has done so in every successive presidential campaign since the beginning, since the first one, is based on states' census count. And as we all witnessed with the failed, thankfully, citizenship questions, is it? Okay. Sorry about that. I'm just going to hold on to this for a minute. And as we saw with the citizenship question, is that okay? All of those things were on the line. All of those things. Political representation, federal funding, and civil rights were all threatened by the Trump administration's effort to eliminate undocumented immigrants from the 2020 census by adding this failed citizenship question to the census. So the connection and the intersectionality between an accurate count of our populations and civil rights is long and storied. It's not a pretty story. And we're fighting every day, the National Urban League, to make sure that this is a situation that is reversed. So thank you.
And it's very important because when you look at historically undercounted communities, most often they are people of color. They're people of color regardless of socioeconomic status. And so helping them to appreciate how this really ties in with our history and our past is critically important to encouraging them to get out and complete the count.
It is, and it has been a struggle this time around. We've seen a lot and witnessed a lot this decade, from police shootings to political dialogue that has been divisive among our communities, and so it has been a challenge for us, and we've had to look at additional means of messaging, which I appreciate being shown earlier. Mm-hmm. We've had to go deep and talk about other issues to make sure that our communities hear this message and heed it. So indeed, it has been.
Sonam, do you want to add to anything?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jerry covered it really well. I think everything I was going to say, Jerry said. So no, but I think to underscore, hard to count communities are the same communities that we're fighting for other issues on, right? So with the census, having an undercount can have dire consequences for everyone in the room and the communities that you represent. So it's really, really important that we're ensuring that they're counted. And we've seen with this administration that there's been like an anti-immigrant agenda already. And so for them trying to, again, with what Jerry said, is kind of scare communities from filling out the form, that just shows how important the census is to the next 10 years for federal funding, for political representation, all around. And so I think, again, we at the Leadership Conference, and just as background, the Leadership Conference, we're a coalition of over 200 civil and human rights organizations. And we have identified the census as a civil rights issue, and many of those reasons are something that Jerry has covered already, but again, hard to count communities as people of color, renters, homeless individuals, those are all people that we're fighting for other civil rights issues as well. And so ensuring that they are all counted on the 2020 census is extremely important.
Can you all hear me? Okay, great. Echo everything that's already been said, but just to bring in the LGBTQ perspective in it. The task force has been working on census advocacy since the 1990s. That was the first time they added unmarried partner as one of the categories to the relationship to the household head question. And since then, we've just been advocating to get more visibility of LGBTQ identities on the census. As we know, for the 2020 census, there were some challenges to getting that done. So the responses on the census itself will be same-sex unmarried partner, same-sex married partner. That captures definitely some members from our communities, but not everyone. So we're still working to have that captured because it's very important. We don't have a lot of data on LGBTQ people on a national level. Back in 2000, when they did have that same-sex option available, we were able to aggregate some data, publish some results, and that, even though it was quite over a decade now, folks still use that as a resource because it's just so scarce. So these kinds of questions are important so that we have data to be able to enforce different civil rights protections.
Speaker.
Am I on? Okay, buenos dias, good morning. So I don't want to belabor the points that have been made here. Naleo would say that if you undercount or not count accurately the 60 million Latinos throughout the country, this census will be a failed census, will be a failed exercise. So when it comes to civil rights, and it comes to our voting rights, our accessibility rights at the ballot box and in our public services, we depend on census data, on accurate census data for our advocacy. So we hold that, again, if you miscount the 60 million Latinos in our country, we're going to have a failed census.
So let's talk about the implications with a little bit more detail. At FPWA, we have a federal funds tracker that we created and just launched earlier this year. And essentially what it does is it tracks federal funds allocations from the federal level down to community-based organizations. And what we've learned from doing implementing the federal funds tracker is that between fiscal year 2010 and 2018, federal grants have fallen by $1.8 billion, 21% after adjusting for inflation here in New York City. And what that looks like, what that translates into is a decline in education funding by $1.3 billion, 43%. Social services, $320 million, 8%. Environmental protection, $19 million. Health, $14 million. And transportation, $9 million. Now that's in part using 2010 census data, making determinations about what states should receive, and in turn, what cities should receive. So here in New York City, just on the last census data, we lost $1.8 billion, and we had a significant undercount last go-round. We stand to lose more, especially under this administration. Let's talk about some of those implications, what it actually looks like on the ground.
Okay, very well, thank you. Can you hear me now? Is this less, can you hear me? Okay, so these are really serious implications, and you've already noted that, but I think we should begin, I'd like to begin with a big elephant, if you will, that's in the room, and that is the Census Bureau's treatment of incarcerated individuals, formerly incarcerated and the incarcerated. So last census, I have some numbers here, so just bear with me. Last census in 2010, adult Hispanic males were incarcerated at the rate of 1,755 inmates per 100,000 U.S. residents. Adult Black non-Hispanic males were incarcerated at the rate of 4,347 inmates per 100,000 U.S. residents. Adult white males, on the other hand, were incarcerated at the rate of 678 inmates per 100,000 US residents. Just let that sink in for a minute. So we can see who's disproportionately affected by these incarceration rates. At the end of 2016, the Prison Policy Initiative estimated that about 2.3 million people were incarcerated in the United States, disproportionately Black and brown. So of all those numbers, and I have some other numbers, how many are in local jails, how many are in immigrant detention facilities, all those numbers. Where does the Census Bureau count incarcerated individuals? In the prisons and not at their address of record. So that means all those benefits attributed to all those people who look like us go to some other community, because often these prisons are in rural locations, far away, upstate, downstate, you name it, and these populations often don't reflect the racial makeup and the economic situation of those incarcerated. So that's a huge swath of people.
Right. The benefits and the representation.
The benefits, and then when you look at how many people return to the communities each year, that's about 700,000 who are coming back to the community, who may be disenfranchised, who may be disaffected, who may not feel the census matters. So are you all counting them? Who's counting incarcerated individuals? Are they on your complete count committees? So that's a beginning, and I can go on. 6 out of every 10 Black and brown child is not counted in the census. Those numbers go to Head Start, WIC, school lunch programs, and they also count towards your apportionment numbers. So I'll leave it there, but the implications are extremely serious. Thank you for asking that question.
One thing I'll say is that an undercount can have extreme consequences. I know that there was a statistic, and so I'm saying this off the top of my head, so may need to go back on these numbers, but I think it was Tucson, Arizona missed, I think, 30,000 people in their 2010 census. And so you have to think about how many people missed out on having a hospital in their city, so that now you have overcrowded hospitals, you have overcrowded schools. So the students that would normally get one-on-one attention are now splitting that attention because there was an undercount on the census. And so to echo again what Jerry's saying, there's dire consequences, and all of these consequences tend to fall on the hard-to-count communities, which tend to be people of color. And so you see these consequences reverberate across generations. So.
And the important takeaway from this is that we need to be able to break that information down and help people understand, because when you just say, oh, we'll lose federal funding, well, many people don't know what federal funding is tied to, right? They don't know that there may be programs in their community, Head Start, that receive federal Head Start grants directly from the federal government. And if we lose that program, then children don't get the support that they need. So you need to be able to give examples of what it actually looks like. Would you like to add anything, Vaughn? Right.
So, for example, in New York State, in the 2010 census, we undercounted 21,000 Latino children under the age of 5. Nationally, about 400,000 Latino children under 5 were not counted in the census. So again, when we talk about schools, when we talk about Title I funding, when we talk about the ability of city planning offices to plan for population growth, those 21,000 kids around the state of New York are missing from our numbers. So, and 400,000 on the national level. There was an undercount of about 1 million children under 5 in 2010. Again, 400,000 nationally were Latinos, 21,000 here in New York. So that has direct impact on how our schools look, on what services are even our parks, you know. I agree with both Jerry and you that we do need to drive the point home to people that direct services are linked to the numbers presented in the census.
Yeah, I had so many thoughts, so sorry, this is a little disorganized. And just sharing a little bit of just personal story and stories that I've heard as well is that, you know, growing up for me in particular was always kind of just like having to choose between kind of my sexual orientation and like my race, ethnicity, cultural aspects. And it was kind of always at odds, or at least I've felt that way. So I encourage everyone, especially folks doing specific race or ethnicity work, to always include an LGBTQ lens, because there are LGBTQ people in every single population that is generally undercounted. And I will say that LGBTQ folks, I also have some stats off the top of my head, so they may be a little incorrect, but LGBTQ families access Medicaid or SNAP at around 22% of LGBTQ families access Medicaid, and around 20% of LGBTQ families participate in Medicaid, SNAP and Medicaid. And that's compared to around 12% and 9% of the population that includes everyone. So we're accessing, our communities are accessing these social service programs that are funded by census, based on census data. So it's really important. Those are kind of the messages that we use out in the field when we're talking to LGBTQ people. And it's also important to note that of the young people who are experiencing homelessness, more than 40% identify as LGBTQ. So we see LGBTQ folks being represented in these populations that have been historically undercounted, young people as well as people who are experiencing homelessness. So yes, thank you.
This is such an important point, and I just want to add just one more point and piece of information that people need to take with them. What often happens with respect to funding for programs is if you go to your neighborhood food and shelter program, you go to a food pantry, you think it's run by the church or it's run by the community-based organization, and so the funding for that program is, coming from that church. Well, that church may have a program that is funded by the Federal Emergency Food and Shelter Program, and that funding is tied to census data. You have to help people appreciate that just because you're receiving a service in your community doesn't mean that it's community funded, doesn't mean that it's a city funded program, doesn't mean that it's a state funded program, that it may be tied directly to the federal monies that come in, that may flow to the state and then down to the locality and to the community-based organization, or that may flow directly from the federal government. Helping people to appreciate that even though you're getting a service in your community doesn't mean that that funding is guaranteed from a city government or a state government is critically important.
May I?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very important point, because 10 years ago, if we said, hey, the Census Bureau allocates $679 billion to your communities. That worked 10 years ago. When we're now, with all of the polarization, people are saying that we don't know what that number means, and we never saw that. In fact, you all knocked on my door 1,000 times. You made me fill out the form, and guess what?
Yeah.
My rent controlled apartment is now $1 million condo. I'm not here anymore. So when we that $675 billion is like talking, like Oprah's gonna give you a car or something. This is not gonna happen in people's estimation. So we do have to say, we have to drill down to exactly what you said and talk about the school lunch program and the TANF and the Pell Grants and things like that people access every day. And then the light goes on. They're like, oh, and I'm like, are you gonna, that brother-in-law you're trying to get off of your couch who's waiting on his Section 8 voucher, you better fill out your form. So, those are the kind of conversations. You gotta go there, okay?
Yeah, you gotta lay it out.
Yeah.
Let's talk about strategies and tactics that are being employed here in New York City and elsewhere. At FPWA, we're driving a faith-led census, appreciating that many people see the faith community as trusted partners. We've got some FPWAers in the room who are working on this initiative, but we're appreciating that very often people in undercounted communities see the faith community as the go-to, as somebody that they can depend upon for accurate and trustworthy information. Other organizations and institutions like yours are trusted partners. Talk about some of what you're doing and what you're seeing in other counties, other states, efforts that are being made that are good. And then also tell us about some of the things that maybe we should stay away from. What works and what doesn't work? Let's begin with Juan.
No pressure. So NALEO, as a national organization, we are the Latino hub leader with the Census Council 2020 coalition, led from the leadership conference. And so we're working at a national level in various states and counties, and we have 3 main deliverables that we're bringing to our communities. One, we have a 12-hour-a-day census hotline, which is bilingual. It will be staffed by people that can walk residents through the questionnaire and any questions they may have about census. That's 1-877-EL-CENSO. It's operational now. It's going to be operational during self-response rate. We have our hagasecontar.org website, which gives community leaders, community residents, anyone who wants to work on census and target Latinos, it gives them a host of, again, the toolkits and the communications toolkits and digital products that they can use. And we have a 3-part train the trainer training that we're going to be doing starting in January. And that's again to just do what was said here earlier, right? To make sure that people have the best messages, that we're empowering the best messengers, that we're making sure that teachers, after school providers, Head Start people, people in hospitals, the nurses unions, that they understand that for Latinos, they are one of the most trusted messenger groups, right? So they could hear it from me all they want. They probably will not get convinced, but if they hear it from a doctor, if they hear it from a teacher, if they hear it from the school principal, they will fill out that form because they trust those people. There are huge disparities at the national level. California invested $187 million. The state government of California only, $187 million towards census outreach. NALEO has been working with a lot of organizations out in California to make sure that we're regranting, that we're working on the ground. In Texas, total opposite. The state put $0 towards census outreach. And NALEO yesterday joined a philanthropic effort that allocated $3 million so that groups around the state, such a huge state, can do some census outreach work. Similarly in Florida, the state government put no dollars. It was left to the counties and the philanthropic community to come up with dollars to make sure that we're talking to people about census. Here in New York and the Northeast, we've been luckier. New Jersey put $9 million towards the census effort. Connecticut found $500,000. I think they're going to find a little more later on. Rhode Island also found some money. Massachusetts, Pennsylvania found $4 million to allocate.
Let's do this. So I want to talk more about like on the ground tactics.
Yeah.
Right. Whether people have resources or not. We're hoping that the resources are there. But what can community-based organizations do? And what are you seeing that is working or has worked in the past?
Yeah. So I just talked, but I'm going to just finalize by saying I think that having the right information and the right tactics is key, right? So that we're not saying to people, complete your census, stick it to Trump. That research found that does not work with people. To get them to fill out the census, right? So the more information that we have, I know that people could be like, well, one more toolkit, one more training, but you know what? That's what matters, is making sure that people who are talking to residents on the ground have the best information, research-based, on how to turn out people to get them to respond.
Well, we have, and I see my colleague over there, Maria, who's here doing the good work and supporting in a great way this 2020 census effort that the National Urban League is conducting. But we believe we have to meet people where they are. We can't sit in the office, and we did a toolkit, a real nice toolkit. And that was, that was to help the 90 affiliate, our network of 90 affiliates understand the milestones in the census and how to strategically allocate time to the Get Out the Count effort. But one of the things we've done is we kind of, I always use this terminology, it's probably not real nice, but we mashed up Black clergy with Head Start administrators to talk about the important, have a dialogue, and people who are right there working with in our communities to talk about the importance of counting children. We have a 2020 Census Black Roundtable. We know the Black immigrant count is so important. If we don't count Black immigrants, we're not counting Black people. So the 2020 Census Roundtable that the National Urban League has put together has pulled in organizations along the African diaspora to help us get the count out. There's an organization called Fair Count that Stacey Abrams has put together in Atlanta, Georgia. She's created an all African American male complete count committee to get to the formerly incarcerated. And so there are, and others. So there are tactics out there to reach the very, very hard to count. And Sona, I'll just stop
Lots
now.
of pressure. No. Yeah, so the Census Counts campaign, we're a national umbrella, but we also work with both national groups and state groups. And the idea is that, again, hard to count communities are intersectional. So they can be part of the Black community, they can be part of the LGBTQ community, but we don't work in silos. When you walk down the street, your neighborhood is not gonna just look like a homogeneous street. So we want to make sure that people on the ground as trusted messengers understand what resources are available. And so the Census Counts campaign is bringing together all of the different organizations that are focused on hard to count communities. And it includes the 3 organizations up here along with many other organizations. But it's not just community-based organizations. We're working with direct service providers, people that are talking to hard to count communities on a daily basis based on healthcare or something that they wouldn't be thinking about census as their #1 priority. And so the idea is that people are hearing about the census in multiple ways and from multiple people because, again, one touch is not going to get someone to fill out the census, but if they keep hearing it and they're almost annoyed with how many times you've told them about the census, then maybe they're more interested, they know what's coming. And so the idea behind the Census Counts campaign is that we're coordinating both on the national level and on the state level so that you're not just getting one toolkit, you're getting hundreds of toolkits, because I'm sure everyone here loves toolkits, and you're getting the right messaging. So the messaging for the Latinx community may not be the same messaging for the LGBTQI community. And so what is the right messaging for the community that you're talking to, and how can you get that in one place? And that's kind of what Census Counts is doing, is we're taking the great work from all of these different organizations and finding a hub, a place for everyone to access it so that you can get this messaging information, you can get those translated resources, and that you as an organization on the ground don't have to do all the work, but you can take the work that's already being done and replicate it as you're doing your Get Out the Count efforts. And again, I think the biggest thing is that all of you in this room are trusted community members. You're the trusted messengers, and you work with those trusted messengers. And so people that need to get counted are going to need to hear it from you all. And so how can we, as the Census Counts campaign and as national organizations, provide you with whatever materials you need? And so that's kind of what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So the Queer to Census campaign works on the federal level to try to get the SOGI questions on, but we also host a monthly LGBTQ Census Coalition where a lot of our state partners like Equality Texas, Equality California are there. We provide resources and we provide technical assistance to anyone who asks. We essentially created a toolbox. We just wanted something physical to mail out to people, so you can request it on our website. But essentially, it just has kind of a starter pack of Get Out the Count materials. It has all the kind of resources you need, as well as partner resources on there as well. But just based on our technical assistance and our Get Out the Count efforts that we currently do in Florida, we found kind of 3 things that come up for the LGBTQ community specifically. One is around the SOGI question. So I just want to be clear that whenever someone asks about it, we address that it's not there, we acknowledge it, we say we're working on it, and then we talk about all the other important things that they should care about as well. The funding piece, the fact that, schools and infrastructure. So we don't try to hide from that. We address it, we're working on it, let's move on. It's still important to get counted, right? And that's something that folks, we've met a lot of resistance that they don't want to be counted at all because of that. Another is around the name and sex question. For a lot of folks in our community, there are millions of folks who don't go by the names or don't have the same gender identities that's on their official documents. So we always stress that the census data is used purely for statistical purposes. They're not there to cross-reference any information with any other information from other agencies. So we encourage people to answer as comfortably and true to themselves as they feel comfortable with. People know how to answer that questions. They navigate that questions throughout their lives every single day. So just having these specific types of knowledge on how to talk about the LGBTQ community, I think is really important. Yeah. Thanks.
Excellent one.
I just want to add in the what works category. I want to give a huge shout out to the city's Office of the Census, led by Julie Menin. I see Danielle Porcaro, who's here from her office. I'm not sure I don't see anyone else, but I see Danielle. Hi. But the city not only gave organizations money, it didn't say, here's money, go do your work. It's bringing us together at least twice, 3 times a month, led by United Way of New York City, by Hester Street, including Chinese American Planning Council, the New York Immigration Coalition, Make the Road New York, Hispanic Federation, and a lot of others, Medgar Evers College. And they're bringing us together various times a month to ensure that we're coordinating our efforts. That if any one of us is gonna buy ads, that Make the Road New York is not also doing the same ad. So that we're advising the city on what the city's putting out. So in terms of what works, I really think that, and I think Julie's gonna be here later, but the city's doing a great job in coordinating the census efforts that is funding.